Well, let me begin by saying that consideration of the extraordinary authorities of the Emergency Act was something that was approached with the appropriate caution and care. Certainly, we looked at existing authorities, the effectiveness of law enforcement in order to provide adequate and effective policing services, to uphold the rule of law, and to deal effectively with the demonstrations and the disruptions that were taking place. We have been working from the outset, for example, with the city, with the police of local authority, along with the RCMP and other police services, and we've been working with the province as well. But over the course of the last 2 weeks, we've also seen a pretty significant shift and the consequences of a shift where we've seen targeting of critical infrastructure in this country. And so I'm specifically referring, Evan, to the people who set up blockades at certain points of entry. And the impact of those blockades was to essentially strangle the movement of essential goods and services across our borders. And the impact of that, I think, represents a national security threat and required action.
You said it's a national security. Premiers who were on the call with the Prime Minister today said there was a threat, Minister Blair, but it didn't need the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act. For example, Ontario already has declared an Emergencies Measures Act. Many of the premiers who do not, I know Ontario supports it, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec, say these provinces and these police forces already have the capacity to deal with these threats, and they don't know what adding the Emergencies Act does. What more does this give these provinces the power to do that they couldn't do if they'd actually already enforced their own laws?
Yeah, a number of very important things. And for example, we have seen, just as an example, in Coutts, Alberta, the blockades that have been on the highway at Coutts, all the way up to Milk River, have actually closed that border to essential services, trade and goods for almost 2 weeks. And the police have used their existing authorities to conduct an investigation today that resulted in, the arrest of several people and the seizure of a significant number of very, very dangerous weapons. But we also want to ensure that the police have the tools that they need in order, as the finance minister said earlier, to follow the money. That we know that these groups are significantly funded by foreign entities. The money's coming in from other countries. And the tools that are currently available, FinTrack is unable at this point in time to adequately track, those suspicious transactions and where that money's coming from. And so through these measures, we'll implement tools that law enforcement and our intelligence services need to do that job. It also creates additional tools that will be significant deterrents to those people, those corporations that have let their trucks be used, to harm the Canadian economy and to harm Canadians. And I think, Evan, it's important for all Canadians to recognize what it means when people put these blockades up. This isn't merely expressing an opinion, which is a constantly protected right for all Canadians, but it's actually it's idled literally thousands of workers in Ontario. It has significantly impacted and resulted in the closure of auto plants across Ontario. It needs to be dealt with, and that's what these authorities are for.
Right. Anytime a government decides to grab more power and infringe on the civil liberties, it's very serious. And it is true that there may be illegal activity going on, but sir, as you know, there's illegal activity going on every day all over the place. You're a former police chief. That does not require the federal government to use the Emergencies Act. And you talk about the financial tracking, which was a big part of today. The rest of the Emergencies Act that were invoked today has to only last for 30 days. But your government is now indicating that financial tracking of crowdfunding sites and crypto will also be permanently used, set out in legislation. There is a concern, sir, that any time the government doesn't like a protest, says, well, we don't like it, now they're going to go track the money, freeze assets. There is a danger of financial overreach that your government or any government could attack their opponents and freeze their funding because you don't like what they stand for. Where are the safeguards?
And let me be very clear, Evan, your characterization, I would respectfully say, is not correct. First of all, the Emergencies Act was brought in. To be fair, we don't know. Well, no, but stay with me here just for a moment, if I may. The Emergencies Act was brought in the 80s as a direct result of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that was adopted in Canada. In everything we do, we have to remain and will remain charter compliant, respecting the rights and freedoms of Canadians. We're not, nothing supersedes that act, which is the highest law in the country. But at the same time, we recognize that the existing tools and the Emergencies Act, as we've said, is measured. It's proportional to the threat that exists in this country. It's temporary. It has a sunset. We will only have those powers for as long as they're required. As the Prime Minister said, the legislation actually requires us to come before Parliament within 7 days. There'll be a parliamentary committee to oversee its application. We'll also, it's also subject to sunset in 30 days unless renewed, and we've said very clearly, we sincerely hope that we can end the use of this act far sooner. And frankly, for me, Evan, and I know for the Prime Minister, if the people that are blockading our bridges and our borders and causing enormous disruption in our communities and impacting the rights and freedoms of every Canadian in those communities, if they were to decide to go home today, then we won't need to continue with this act. But as long as this threat to critical infrastructure in this country and to the lives and safety of Canadians exists, then we believe that these are proportionate, measured, carefully determined authorities that address gaps that currently exist in the Canadian criminal law, in provincial statute and municipal bylaw. Clearly, the tools have proven inadequate in many circumstances, and it's why, in particular, like, for example, just some of the measures. Well, I've already talked about the financial measures. You know, we've asked the RCMP to come in and help in Ottawa and in other places. But the vast majority of RCMP officers are not sworn in to serve as constables to enforce municipal and provincial bylaws, just as an example. And so that has administratively been very difficult because we're moving a lot of people in to help here in Ottawa. And so part of the Emergency Measures Act that we're imposing has a provision to allow those RCMP officers to act as constables in Ontario or Quebec and in order to use their provincial and municipal bylaws. And it's a temporary measure, appropriate and necessary in these circumstances.
Okay, that's a really interesting point, and I just want people to understand that, because that's going to directly impact what kind of action we may or may not see, for example, in Ottawa. So the RCMP needs to be literally sworn in order to enforce any of these provincial bylaws. They can use it, they work on federal things, they work on security, but that now they are essentially deputized, they're sworn in like they would be an OPP officer or an OPS in Ottawa Police Services. I understand that, and that gives your force more power. But Ottawa has asked for 1,800 officers. There has been literally zero enforcement on this stuff, on what the Premier has called a siege in the nation's capital. How will these emergency powers be displayed in real terms in terms of enforcement? The laws have been on the books, are just not enforced. What are we going to see now in terms of enforcement with these new federal emergency powers? Will there be more RCMP officers on the ground?
No, first of all, let me give you an example. There are municipal bylaws in the City of Ottawa that prohibit parking in certain areas on the roadway, and certainly for blocking traffic. But these protesters have not been deterred by those measures. There are similar provisions in the Ontario Highway Traffic Act with respect to parking and blocking the flow of traffic on our highways, such as down in Windsor. And yet those protesters and blockaders were not deterred by that legislation. But so we will always use, and I'll tell you from long experience, the police will use the minimum authority and the minimum amount of force to resolve this situation as peacefully as possible. But in many respects, that has proven to be inadequate. We have listened very carefully, and we're working closely with the City of Ottawa, with our provincial partners, particularly the OPP and the RCMP, to make sure that the police of jurisdiction, with the support of their policing partners, have the proper command structure in place and the tools and resources they need to restore order for the people of Ottawa. The people of Ottawa are entitled to adequate and effective policing services, and we're all working together to make sure that the rule of law is upheld here and that they are kept safe.
What they want is 1,800 officers. Are they going to get them?
Can I just move you a little bit past how many, and let's have a conversation about to do what? We are working with the City of Ottawa and with our provincial partners, police services right across Ontario, to make sure that the police have the right resources and the right tools and authorities to effect the purpose of restoring the rule of law and order in the City of Ottawa. and to end these illegal blockades and to give peace to the people of Ottawa. And I know it's sometimes easy to sort of go to the number, but let's talk about getting the job done.
No, I know, but the job's not being done. That's the bottom line. It's been 18 days.
And that's why we're acting, because the job's not being done and it needs to be done.
With the police here. Well, so what's happened? It's been 18 days. Whether it's 1,800 or 1,700, when are they going to get, how about this? When is Ottawa going to get enough security or police force to, and actually have some kind of plan to stop the illegal blockades, as the Premier's call them? Can you give us a timeline, a plan, a number, anything? Because it's been 18 days of almost nothing.
Evan, let me just again take issue with your characterization. It certainly hasn't been a joke to the people of Ottawa, who have suffered under, the noise, the disruption, the intimidation. Their livelihoods and the peace in their own communities has been taken from them, and that's not a joke to anybody. We understand the importance of restoring order and serving those people.
Don't twist my words. The joke was the lack of enforcement. But go ahead.
Well, Evan, there's no joke here. There's an important job that needs to be done. That's why we're working with the city. That's why we're working with the province. We're working with the RCMP, the OPP, the Police of Jurisdiction, which is the OPP. I've spoken to other police leaders in Ontario. They all recognize the importance of upholding the rule of law in this city, but also at other points in the province, particularly at critical infrastructure, which is having such an enormous impact and to the detriment of all of the people of Ontario and all the people of Canada. And so the police have an important job to do. I said yesterday on your show, and I'll repeat it, Canada needs the police to do their job. And we need to make sure that the police have the resources and the authorities they need and our support, because it's so important that the rule of law be maintained and restored in communities where it's been lost, and also that we bring to an end this threat to our borders, to critical infrastructure, to open up those borders. And frankly, lawful peaceful protest is a constitutionally protected right in this country, and there's nothing in the Emergency Act or anything we are doing that in any way interferes with people's right to lawfully protest and express their opinions, to assemble and engage in process. There's a right way to do it. What we're seeing on the streets of Ottawa and what we saw in Windsor, in Coutts, Alberta, in Emerson, Manitoba, and in Surrey, British Columbia is the wrong way to do it. And that's why it has been unfortunately necessary. We take no pleasure in having to bring forward these measures, but they are necessary in order to restore the rule of law, to protect Canadian interest, and to protect our critical infrastructure.
Sir, a couple of just real quick specific questions. Part of this is about freezing funds that can be used to support these, what the government is calling illegal blockades. Give us, when will that happen? How will this happen? And does the government already, are there funds already targeted? Is that happening now?
Our officials are going to immediately begin to use the authorities that are provided under this legislation to help restore peace and order to our communities. The financial measures that the finance minister mentioned and spoke of today are really important. We know that there's been an enormous amount of money that has been collected primarily from foreign interests. And when money is coming into this country with an intent to harm this country, to harm its critical infrastructure and to harm its citizens, we need to have the tools to make sure that we know where that money is coming from, to hold people to account who are doing it. And in order to do that, we have agencies in this country, FinTrack, for example, that is the agency that we task with tracking suspicious financial transactions. They did not have the authority and the tools they needed to do this important job for us, and we're giving them those tools.
And what's the transparency on that? Like, a lot of people might say, oh, somebody donated to the cause. Now they're going to get their bank frozen. Someone was a sympathizer. They gave $1,000 to the truckers. Are they going to be tagged by a bank? Are they going to have their money frozen? Are they going to not be able to pay their mortgage? I think these are genuine questions. Who gets tagged here?
What happens? And here's the genuine answer. In our current bank laws, suspicious transactions are the responsibility of FinTrack, who gathers that information and under very careful processes and laws that are in place to ensure that there is transparency and accountability where an investigation is necessary, that investigation can take place. But unfortunately, The FINTRAC currently does not have the ability to follow these transactions, and that's what we are looking at, giving them that authority temporarily, and before we would bring forward measures that would become permanent. There'll be a process to that where amendments will have to be made to the Bank Act and other regulations in order to support that. But in the immediate circumstances of this emergency, that we are ensuring that our officials have the authorities they need. I also want to assure Canadians, Evan, that there is accountability and transparency built into the Emergencies Act. There'll be a committee of parliamentarians who will have responsibility for overseeing its implementation. Right. It is subject to votes in Parliament, and it is subject to review and inquiry at the end of the day.